Our next guest tonight is leading the charge in a more holistic approach to addressing homelessness rather than just throwing money at the problem, which only seems to make it worse. So joining us now to discuss is Mary Theroux, the CEO of the Independent Institute. Mary, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. That's quite an intro.
It's such a crazy story, but it really spoke to me with the story of redemption, a guy who really, truly turned his life around. Now, when it comes to the work, the good work that you're doing, when it comes to helping people get off the streets and to turn their lives around, we've never before thrown so much money at it, at homelessness. And yet the problem of homelessness is worse now than it's ever been before. So why do you think that is? And how do you seek to undo that damage with a more holistic approach, as you say?
Well, I think a lot of it is because we have removed the motivation. People I've talked to who have recovered from their drug addiction and from being formerly homeless will say things like desperation is a wonderful gift, that it's very difficult to turn your life around, as that gentleman who saved the policeman showed. He was faced with the 25-year jail sentence and so vowed to avoid that he was going to turn his life around. And often that's what it takes. The problem is we've removed that motivation in our false compassion for people experiencing homelessness by making it's not pleasant to live in the street, but making it so that you can keep living in the street and not face a difficult choice, such as I've hit rock bottom, there's no place to go except go into recovery. And people are not being faced with that sort of brick wall of, I have to make a different choice than I am now. And they are able to just stay in the street, consuming drugs or having untreated mental illness, and on and on and on, and in kind of a zombie-like until they die. Sometimes, yes, people do have to be arrested and face the choice between a sentence or going into recovery or other motivations to go into care. And with our wonderful welfare state here in California and the outreach that homeless service providers do, we're instead making it very possible to stay on the street indefinitely, and that is not compassion.
So in your experience with this, have you seen almost a racket, a homelessness racket when it comes to especially city officials, but also some state officials? And here in California, I'm thinking San Francisco, LA, Oakland, even some of these, these areas that when you think of, mass amounts of crime and mass amounts of tent cities of homelessness. Have you seen pushback from some of those officials? Because the way I've heard described before is just a racket that basically they get paid to leave people on the streets to, as you said, make it as quote unquote comfortable as possible for people to keep making these worst of all choices while these city officials keep pocketing more and more money, and the problem only seems to get worse and not better.
Well, and it goes beyond the officials because they're also funding a lot of nonprofits and corrupting their work. So they're paying nonprofits to carry out what they believe is the answer. And it's unfortunate because there are nonprofits who do good work and then they decide that government funding is easy to get, so they mistakenly take it. But the problem with the government funding is it comes with very specific strings of how it's to be used, and it's being used in a very helpful way. So it's policy that starts at the federal government. It's been adopted explicitly by the state of California as state policy, and most locales follow it as well. And it's a belief that homelessness is caused by a lack of housing, that if you put people into housing, the problem is solved. That's not accurate. Homelessness is caused by many things, and not having a place to live is often very far down there. The other is called harm reduction, and harm reduction sounds nice. You're going to reduce the harm to people from taking drugs. Well, the ultimate harm reduction is to get people off of drugs. But the way harm reduction is practiced is that it gives people clean needles and pamphlets on how to smoke fentanyl, foil, pipes, and other paraphernalia for using drugs, and at no cost. We've also made shoplifting essentially legal, so you can shoplift to pay for your drugs. And then we have very generous welfare benefits that also provide a relatively high standard of living for living in the streets. So all of these things combine to create these vast numbers of people who continue to be in the streets suffering badly. And it's got to be reversed. The fortunate thing is the common citizens are waking up to it. Our film, Beyond Homeless, Finding Hope, is resonating very widely and across the political spectrum. People are compassionate. They do want people experiencing homelessness to be able to escape from it. And they're beginning to understand that the status quo is perpetuating homelessness, but there are real ways that the community can come together and create those kinds of paths out of homelessness that people need.
And like you were saying, we hear a lot that it's the housing has to come first. But like you said, if you don't address the root issues, that's not going to work. It's going to leave them and everyone else back at square one with just more money being wasted. You see a lot of it is drug abuse, unfortunately. A lot of it is severe mental health issues. Oftentimes those two go together. But also it's a lack of having a strong family to fall back on. There's a lot of issues with having no one to care for you, especially if you're starting to have mental health issues. If you don't have a strong connection of people to care for you and to help you through, unfortunately, a lot of them, they don't know where else to go. And so they just end up going on the streets and they make families there. So like you said, it's a very thorny issue. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Now, you mentioned your film. We do have we actually have the trailer of it. I like to play it real fast. Then afterward, you can tell the audience where they can watch it and what they should take away from it. But first, let's roll the clip.
San Francisco, the city by the sea.
California really was the Golden State when I arrived in the 70s. The streets of San Francisco were vibrant, free, and filled with hope. Now my beloved San Francisco has become known as ground zero for our nation's homelessness crisis. Beyond Homeless, Finding Hope is an exploration of what's driving the homelessness crisis here in California and a look at alternative approaches around the country that offer hope with real solutions. Join us in changing the narrative of our nation's homelessness crisis.
Can you tell our audience what that hope is for a better solution? And also, like I said a moment ago, where they can watch the film for themselves?
It is available online at beyondhomeless.org. It does start out pretty grim. We're walking the streets of San Francisco, but unlike most documentaries about homelessness, it doesn't stay grim. We then pivot to a model that we found that's been operating for 12 years extremely successfully in San Antonio, Texas, called Haven for Hope. And we feature it prominently. And then we show how the Haven for Hope model can be applied anywhere.
Well, Mary, keep up the great work, and thanks for joining us tonight.